Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. We have come to the end of the road, guys. We are wrapping up Ye Olde Mission Marple, aka straight out of St. Mary Mead. Mission Marple has been my rereading project that I have been working on for the last 8 months, rereading all of the Miss Marple canon. A couple of new reads in here for me, some notable ones, which we will talk about. But generally, I wanted to reread these and kind of just see what I thought of them as an adult or a full adult. I read most of the Miss Marple canon when I was in college, and I enjoyed it, but didn't love it. And honestly, I was a little bit worried about this project going into it because when I did Project Poirot, I did that with the knowledge that I loved Poirot, that he was my favorite of the Christie detectives, and just generally that this was going to be something I was probably really going to enjoy. Of course, there are some highs and lows, but overall was going to really like that. And I, in my mind, remembered Miss Marple as being more, like, not as interesting, basically, just sort of like more boring. And I am delighted to tell you that that impression was totally wrong. I really enjoyed this rereading project, and I think the fact that there were fewer books honestly probably made it easier as well and more enjoyable throughout. So we are going to talk first section about some non-spoilery things. So I'm going to tell you kind of just overall impressions. I'm going to tell you what my personal ranking of these books is, and I'm going to tell you where, if you are new to Miss Marple, where I think you should start, sort of the reading order I would suggest. I will then tell you, hey, spoiler time, and I'm going to dive into some more specific themes in these books and talk a little bit more in depth with spoilers for the last part. So strap in, let's do this. So in terms of my general impressions of this reread, I would say that my biggest takeaway is that while I would still say as a whole, I probably, like, if I was going to pick, you can only keep Poirot or you can only keep Marple, I think I would still choose Poirot over Marple. But that being said, I think that as a whole, the Miss Marple canon is much more consistent in its quality than the Poirot. And what I mean by that is that while I think that there are books in the Poirot canon that are like markedly better than anything in the Marple canon, something like Death on the Nile or Murder on the Orient Express, or for my taste, Cards on the Table, I think is definitely better than anything I read as a part of this project. I think that overall, the lowest rating I gave anything in this canon of 14 books was 2.5 stars, and the vast majority of these books were at least a 3.5 star or higher. That to me is a pretty impressive feat for 14 books that were written across such a long span of time. I mean, we're talking from the early 30s to the early 70s. That's pretty darn impressive. So if I was going to, I think one of my takeaways is if I was going to recommend, if somebody was starting with either Marple or Poirot in terms of they wanted to read an entire series first, I would probably say Marple over Poirot, just because there's fewer books to get through, and because I just think that overall the quality is more consistent. So you would have a better first full series read through experience with Marple. That being said, I will do a full Where to Start with Agatha Christie rebooted video here in the next couple of months. I have an old one on my channel before I did these rereads, so I have some new thoughts about overall where you should start. But if you were going to start with Marple, if you wanted to read that entire series, I have one specific reading order in mind for folks, and that is I think that these books should be read in the order that they were written, not the order that they were published, because the book that was published second to last in the canon was actually written third, and that is Sleeping Murder. Sleeping Murder reads very much like a Christie of the 40s, not a Christie of the 70s, and I think just the world that it's in, the timing in terms of the overall development of the Marple canon, it really, I think, should be read in the order that it was written. So the suggested reading order I have is displaying right now on the screen, I assume, and like I said, I pretty much just want to move Sleeping Murder out from being at the bottom of this list, or the second to last, and have it be the third. So I think you should start with Murder at the Vicarage, then do the 13 Problems, then Sleeping Murder, so on and so forth. Now, Miss Marple's Final Cases is a little tricky just because they were written mostly in the early 30s through the early 50s, but it was not published until 1979, and I would recommend still reading that one, I guess, in order of publication, simply because I think Nemesis is the weakest book in the Marple canon, and I think that you should get the enjoyment of ending your Marple read on a high note. So I would recommend deferring that particular one, Miss Marple's Final Cases. Go ahead and leave that as the last one that you read, but the other ones I think should be read in order that they were written. Now, when it comes to my personal ranking of these books, which is not necessarily an assessment of their objective or as close as one can get to objective quality, just a combination of objective quality with my own personal enjoyment, I do have a little bit of a switch up here, because originally I had put The Murder at the Vicarage at the top, but when I was really looking back through this and sort of like normalizing my list, I realized that in my heart, it is not my favorite Marple. I will mention that going into this project, I would have told you my favorite Marple was The 13 Problems, but that has been demoted, even though I would still give this a 4.5 star and still really love this one. I would not, it has been dethroned, and originally it was dethroned by The Murder at the Vicarage, but if I'm being honest with myself, the one of these books that I liked the best was Sleeping Murder, which I totally did not expect. But yeah, I think honestly I would give this a 5 star upon reflection. This is one of my all-time favorite Christies, which is a real surprise to me. Like, I would put this in the top, let's say 15 Christies that I have read. I just love this. I really, really did. So I would say this is my first. My second would be The Murder at the Vicarage, which I do just think is a delight. I'm also obsessed with this particular cover. This is the facsimile edition. I love that they're all literally just like standing around the dead dude. I enjoy that. And then number 3 for me is The 13 Problems. Like I said, this was originally my top one, but it's now number 3. So I assume you guys are now looking at my overall ranking, and I kept things pretty much the same. The Sleeping Murder was the biggest thing that I changed in terms of order. The other change, though, that I did make, I've highlighted my changes in purple, is that I did demote They Do It With Mirrors down. I originally had that as a 4 star. I think as time has passed, I don't remember it quite as fondly, and I think it's realistically probably more like a 3.5 star. So I think right now I would put it probably under Miss Marple's Final Cases. I do still just like that one probably more than I reasonably should, but I do. I just enjoy it. And then I also, you'll see this little dotted line I put on this particular view. The reason I put that there was basically as a way of saying, like, here's where I think they stop being that good. So I think of the 14, 12 of them are really good quality and easy to recommend. I do think that both At Bertrand's Hotel and Nemesis are noticeably the lesser Marples in the canon. I could see somebody arguing that They Do It With Mirrors maybe should be down there with it. I personally enjoy that one quite a bit, so I would disagree, but I could see that argument. But in terms of like the recommended line, in terms of what books I can recommend to you, I can happily recommend 12 of them to you. Number 13 At Bertrand's Hotel, and number 14 Nemesis are ones that I think really are only for people who are completists or who just really like Marple. I wouldn't recommend those to like a casual Marple reader. And then at a high level, before I move into my more spoilery section of theme wrap up, I would say that my reread of Marple has kind of shown to me a couple of things. One, I think that this is a great series to read if you kind of want to see progression of English history and like cultural milieu and how it impacted small town life. Between the early 30s and the late 70s is sort of the time frame in which this is set, and it's very interesting because the incursion of kind of cultural forces or the outside world into the world of St. Mary Mead or the world of Miss Marple is very, very slow, especially as compared with the Poirot canon, I would say, because it's quite confined and claustrophobic in a lot of ways. You don't see huge sweeping cultural changes that are as noticeable in this setting as it is in the Poirot canon. But that being said, you do slowly see it kind of creeping into St. Mary Mead. I think one of the joys of reading this in order that they were written is that you can really appreciate kind of the slow progression of that over time. You see characters' fortunes changing or circumstances changing based on the world around them. Miss Marple has a lot of reflections and musings on the passage of time and what it means for her, what it means to sort of be no longer relevant. It's kind of a weird word to use, but sort of no longer, let's say, culturally fluent in the society around you. There's a lot of musings on the passage of time in this, and by reading this in order that I was it's written, you really get to appreciate that as sort of an overall theme of the series. I think that there's also a lot in these books about people underestimating women and kind of ageism, specifically around the character of Miss Marple, but there's also a lot of side characters that I think fall into that bucket as well. So I think that's a major theme in these books. I think sexuality is actually quite a big theme in these books, and I'll talk more about that in the spoilery section, but suffice it to say that who is or is not sleeping together is very frequently a huge factor in these books that Miss Marple, considering how Victorian she is, discusses with quite a bit of candor and sort of very bald assessments of human nature when it comes to sexuality. So that's definitely a theme. There's also a lot of discussion about the serving class and kind of what their place is, how that changes over time. I think that is noticeable both in sort of the overall setting or environs that these books are set in, but it is also very apparent in the mystery puzzles themselves, which I think is interesting. And then, just a kind of very simple observation, but one that you definitely feel if you've done these kind of two projects back to back the way that I have with Poirot and Marple, rereading all of Poirot in a year and then rereading Marple in a year. And that is basically just that they have two fundamentally different kind of ways that they are able to detect. So Marple, you very much can see quickly in her canon that hers is always based on being able, like pattern finding, basically. So like pattern finding in human behavior, making comparisons and analogies between other circumstances that she has observed in her small village life and applying it to the matter at hand, and that being the way that she detects. And so in that way, Marple really is a detective from within. So people underestimate her basically because she's almost like a part of the furniture. They just don't even notice that she's there. They kind of write her off as a little old biddy, like I was talking about earlier. They don't take her seriously enough, and that is how she detects. Whereas Poirot, xenophobia is a huge theme in the Poirot canon that definitely really isn't present for the most part in Marple. A few instances here and there, but mostly not really a theme here. And Poirot detects through logic, reason, like that is very, he's assessing the situation and making logical deductions. And then he essentially, the reason people don't take him seriously enough is because he's an outsider. They underestimate him. They kind of write him off as just a foreigner. So it is very interesting if you've read these two different canons back to back to definitely see a huge contrast in terms of what kinds of detectives they are. And I think that reading them back to back, it becomes more apparent what feels like a Marple book versus what feels like a Poirot book. I think that while I really love a country house mystery, I do think that Poirot tends to be better suited to those. There's a couple in the Marple canon that are more country house type mysteries. And while I enjoyed them because I just like that kind of mystery, I don't know that she's as suited to that setting. I really think that Marple is at her best when she's in her village with people that she knows, and detecting in that way. That being said, my favorite book in this was Sleeping Murder, which is not set in St. Mary Mead. It is set in another small town. But in general, I think that sort of cozy, small English village setting really is what Marple's all about. And I think that's kind of where she shines and where she belongs. Okay, so a couple of things I wanted to mention. As we were talking about throughout this reread project, if you've been watching these books, I have come to believe, are a manifestation of Agatha Christie's sublimated female rage. I think that the number of angry, murderous, violent women in these books is remarkable and very interesting. We see a lot of different iterations of the female rage that I think is being expressed here. I think one of the more interesting ones is in A Murder is Announced, and Letitia being just this savage, comprehensively murderous character, essentially grasping at this life that she's always wanted and sort of trying to hold on to that for herself. I think that's an interesting form. In The Body in the Library, the victim's cousin, I can't remember her name right now, just her contempt for her cousin and her grasping and her tackiness. I think that is really palpable. Clotilde in Nemesis, I think, is a really interesting kind of incarnation of this female anger. I would argue in sort of a more sapphic vein, which is you know, a cliche I don't enjoy, but even if you take a more maternal reading, that's interesting. There's some interesting mother-daughter conflict in At Bertrand's Hotel. Just in nearly all of these, there is some underlying either depiction of female aggression, anger, whatever, or there's like a male interpretation of that. Like I think of the moving finger and sort of like the killer's perception of what an angry or petty or whatever woman would look like if she was writing these poison pen letters. So I just think that that's a real theme here. I also think it's interesting that Miss Marple is consistently portrayed as this sort of avenging fury, like this sort of angel of violent justice is often how she's sort of referred to or thinks of herself as. So as sort of a counterbalance to that, I don't know. I think that the gender studies reading of this series is ready for somebody to write a paper on, basically. So I really enjoyed, once I kind of picked up on that early on, looking for it throughout. Like I said, I do think that there's a lot of sexuality that is a huge theme here, and sort of like the foibles and the kind of the simmering sensuality of cloistered village life, I think tends to be something we see a lot of. And then the other theme that I think, or just like motif, whatever, throughout these books is just savagery, because Miss Marple's whole thing is basically that like humans are far more depraved, they are just worse, they're just garbage basically than you are willing to guess, and that is why you are not able to figure this out, sweet children. She just assumes the worst in everyone, and it is borne out by the fact that Mary Mead is so fucking savage. Like, I'm just like, let's run down some of the ways people were killed. I mean, like I was mentioning, a murder is announced. Homegirl kills people in like 5 different ways. Like she strangles, she tries to drown. I mean, like just the sheer variety of methods in that one. Body in the library, somebody's immolated. There's an allusion, I think they do it with mirrors, to the fact that one of Miss Marple's neighbors had her father try to bludgeon her to death with a hammer. In the mirror cracked from side to side, I think it is, Miss Marple sees somebody try to like push his fiance out of a window. I mean, like, these are really like aggressively violent books, and Miss Marple's sort of like sweet little old lady image, while she docilely recounts like all these terrible things that people are doing to each other, is really a striking contrast. So yeah, that is definitely one of my biggest takeaways, is that like St. Mary Mead is a nightmare house of horrors that you should stay far, far away from. If you are going to pick a fictitious town to inhabit, please do not pick St. Mary Mead, because you will be killed within moments of arriving, apparently. So I think that will wrap up Mission Marple. It has been a very rewarding journey. I've really enjoyed everybody who has read along with me. I appreciate your insights. So many of you know far more about Agatha Christie than I ever will, so I always enjoy your commentary. I've had some people say that they would like me to do Tommy and Tuppence. I honestly don't think that I'm going to do that. Tommy and Tuppence is, I don't know, I'm not that interested to read that canon, to be honest. I've only read one. I will get to them at some point, but I'm not in a hurry to do so. There's only like 5 of them. I'm not going to do a whole thing on that. I will just read them in good course. So I think that this probably wraps up my Agatha Christie reading projects, but I appreciate everybody who has enjoyed them and has participated in them. You will be getting 2 more Agatha Christie related, or no, I guess 3. I've got 3 Agatha Christie related videos that I know are coming out sometime this year. I'm going to do a seasonal Agatha Christie recommendation video, because I've gotten a lot of requests to do that, of like, I want something Agatha Christie for fall. I'll do that. I'm going to do a ranking video where I rank all of the Agatha Christie novels that I have read in order of my preference, not their actual quality. So I expect to get a lot of fervor from passionate Christie fans in the comments, who are just a truly terrifying bunch, let me tell you. But I'm gonna just put my ranking out there of like personally which ones I like the best and like the worst. And then I'm also gonna make an updated where to start with Agatha Christie video, just because my first one was at the beginning of my channel, and like I was saying earlier, it was before I had done these big rereading projects. So I think I have a new mindset on where I think you should start if you have never read an Agatha Christie before. I get that question a lot. I usually point people back to that old video, but I would like to be able to point them to a new one. So that is Christie upcoming for me, but for now, Mission Marple is at an end. So I think that will do it. Definitely let me know in the comments what you have thought about Mission Marple, what you think about Miss Marple in general, what you think about Christie, anything like that. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much to those of you who have read along. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, I think that will do it. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. Hope you're having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.